Disappearance at Sea, the Carroll, a Deering story. The ocean doesn't keep secrets, it swallows them whole. For every ship that makes it to port, another battles the waves, and some just vanish. They become legends, whispered on the wind and tide, ghost ships. Now the most famous of these is the Mary Celeste, but there's another story just as chilling, just as complete in its mystery. It's the story of a magnificent five-masted schooner found wrecked and deserted. Its sails were still set. A meal was on the galley stove, but its crew was gone, erased from the world. And this isn't some work of fiction. This is the true story of the Carroll A. Deering, the ghost ship of the Outer Banks. What happened to the 12 men who sailed her? For over a century, the answer has been lost to the waves, locked in a mystery that involves mutiny, pirates, and the strange, dark forces of the sea itself. January 31st, 1921. Through the mists of a stormy dawn, a surfman on watch at Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, spots an impossible sight. A colossal five-masted schooner, driven hard onto the treacherous Diamond Shoals. Its sails are fully, eerily set, as if it's still under command. But no one is at the helm. For days, violent seas keep anyone from getting close. When rescuers finally climb aboard, they find a ghost ship. In the galley, pots of food sit on the stove, a meal prepared for a crew that is nowhere to be found. The captain's cabin is a mess, but the ship's log, its navigational tools, and every single one of its 12 crew members have vanished without a trace. Where did they go? What could make an entire crew abandon their ship in the middle of a meal? The answers lie somewhere between a violent rebellion and the depths of the ocean itself. To really get the mystery, you have to understand the ship. The Carroll A. Deering was a marvel of her time. Launched on April 4th, 1919 from the G.G. Deering Company yards in Bath, Maine, she was one of the last great wooden schooners ever built. A 255-foot, five-masted behemoth, she was made for the rugged world of commercial cargo hauling. Outfitted with oak, mahogany, and ash, she was even considered luxurious for a cargo vessel, with some accounts claiming she had features like electricity and steam heat. The owner was so proud, he named her after his son, Carroll Atwood Deering. This wasn't just a collection of planks and sails. She was a testament to a fading era of maritime craftsmanship, a powerful vessel designed to tame the world's oceans. Her final voyage began on August 26, 1920, leaving Virginia with a cargo of coal for Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. At first, the ship was commanded by Captain William H. Merritt, a celebrated hero of the Great War. Just 2 years earlier, Merritt had saved his entire crew when a German U-boat sank his previous ship. His son, Sewall, was serving as his first mate. But shortly after leaving Virginia, Captain Merritt fell gravely ill. The Deering had to turn back, putting into port in Delaware to leave both Merritt and his son behind. The G.G. Deering Company needed replacements, and fast. They found their new captain in William W. Wormel, a 66-year-old retired sea captain, a veteran of the waves coaxed back for one last trip. As first mate, the company hired a man named Charles B. McClellan. With a new command structure and a crew of 10 men, mostly from Denmark, the Carroll A. Deering set sail once more on September 8, 1920. The trip down to Rio went off without a hitch. The coal was delivered. But under the surface of this routine journey, a dark current was beginning to form. While docked in Rio, Captain Wormel gave his crew shore leave. During this time, he met up with an old friend, a Captain Goodwin. In their conversations, Wormel didn't hold back about his new crew. He complained about their unruliness and said he deeply mistrusted most of them. The one man he claimed to trust was the ship's engineer, Henry Bates, whom Goodwin also knew. But his main source of frustration? His own first mate, Charles McClellan. The Carroll A. Deering left Rio on December 2, 1920, stopping for supplies in Barbados. It was here that the tension simmering on the ship boiled over for everyone to see. First mate McClellan got drunk at the Continental Cafe and was overheard openly trashing Captain Wormel. He griped about the captain's skills, his inability to navigate without his glasses, and his constant meddling. Even more chilling, one crew member was overheard making a direct threat, saying he was going to get the captain before the voyage was over. McClellan was arrested for his drunken tirade and thrown in jail. In a move that was either merciful or just practical, Captain Wormel went ashore, bailed his first mate out, and brought him back to the ship. But the damage was done. Wormel wrote to Captain Goodwin telling him he was having trouble with his crew and just had to grin and bear it. He was worried a mutiny was brewing. This stop in Barbados was a critical turning point. It left a clear paper trail of the bad blood between the captain and his second-in-command. When the Deering weighed anchor and left Barbados on January 9, 1921, bound for Virginia, it sailed under a cloud of suspicion and barely contained hostility. The seeds of mutiny had been planted. For nearly 3 weeks, the Carroll A. Deering sailed north, fighting the Atlantic's winter storms. Then, on January 28, 1921, the ship was spotted by the Cape Lookout lightship, a floating lighthouse off the coast of North Carolina. What happened next is one of the most crucial and bizarre pieces of the whole puzzle. The Deering hailed the lightship, and its keeper, Captain Jacobson, noted the strange exchange. A man on the schooner's deck used a megaphone to shout across the waves. He reported that the Deering had lost both of its anchors in a storm off Cape Fear, and asked Jacobson to notify the ship's owners. Jacobson logged the message, but his own radio was down, so he couldn't pass it along right away. But it wasn't just the message that was odd. It was the man who delivered it and the whole scene on the Deering's deck. Jacobson described the man with the megaphone as tall, thin, with reddish hair and a foreign accent. This was definitely not the 66-year-old Captain Wormel. In fact, Jacobson noted the man didn't look or act like an officer at all. He also saw that the crew was milling around on the quarterdeck, a part of the ship where the crew wasn't normally allowed. That was the officer's domain. Not a single officer was visible on deck. This was a huge red flag, a profound breach of maritime discipline. It suggested the normal command structure had completely fallen apart. Someone other than Captain Wormel was in control of the ship. The very next day, the log entries, which had been kept in Captain Wormel's handwriting, were suddenly written by someone else. The day after that, the steamship SS Lake Elon passed the Deering and noted it was steering a strange course. Something was clearly deeply wrong aboard the Carroll A. Deering. It was sailing like a ship without a master, a prelude to the discovery that would soon shock the world. At dawn on Monday, January 31, 1921, surfman C.P. Brady stared into the gray morning light. There, caught on the edge of Diamond Shoals, was the Carroll A. Deering. The shoals, a network of shifting sandbars off Cape Hatteras, have been a sailor's nightmare for centuries, earning the area the grim nickname, the Graveyard of the Atlantic. The sight was deeply unsettling. The Deering was stuck fast, getting pounded by breakers with all her sails standing. Her decks were awash with waves, and from a distance, she looked completely abandoned. But the weather was far too violent for rescue ships to even try to approach. For 4 agonizing days, the Coast Guard could only watch as the Atlantic battered the helpless schooner. Finally, on February 4th, the seas calmed enough for a boarding party to make its way to the wreck. What they found has been the subject of intense speculation ever since. They boarded a ship that was both eerily normal and terrifyingly empty. The 2 lifeboats were gone. The ship's logbook, chronometer, and all other navigational gear were missing. The crew's personal belongings were gone too. But in the galley, the scene was frozen in time. Pots of food were on the stove, as if the crew was in the middle of preparing a meal when they just left. The only living souls aboard were a few half-starved cats, including a distinctive 6-toed one. The physical state of the ship only created more questions. The rudder was broken, and the steering wheel was shattered. This suggested either a violent struggle or straight-up sabotage. The ship's anchors were gone, just as the man on the megaphone had reported. But it was a scene that made no sense. Why would a crew, even in an emergency, take the time to gather their personal belongings and the ship's vital records, yet leave a meal cooking on the stove? It was a hasty departure and a methodical one all at once. The 12 men of the Carroll A. Deering had stepped off their ship and into thin air, leaving behind one of the greatest maritime mysteries in American history. The discovery of the abandoned schooner sparked a media frenzy and launched an investigation of a scale rarely seen. The mystery of the Deering wasn't just local news. It became a national obsession. 5 separate U.S. government departments were thrown at the case: Commerce, Treasury, Justice, the Navy, and the State Department. And overseeing the massive effort from the Department of Commerce was a man whose name would soon be known around the world: Herbert Hoover. Hoover was personally intrigued, especially because the Deering wasn't alone. Several other ships, like the sulfur freighter SS Hewitt, had also vanished in roughly the same area at the same time. Hoover put his ambitious assistant, Lawrence Ritchie, in charge of the investigation. Ritchie's task was monumental. He had to build a story from almost nothing. His team tried to chart the Deering ES final days by reviewing the logs of every Coast Guard station along its route. They searched sailors' boarding houses and shipping registers, desperate for any whisper of the missing crew. But it was like chasing ghosts. The Coast Guard tried to salvage the Deering, but the ship was too badly damaged and stuck in the sand. On March 4, 1921, it was declared a hazard to navigation. The Carroll A. Deering was destroyed with dynamite, its wooden hull blown to bits. With the main piece of evidence now in fragments on the ocean floor, the investigation had to turn to theories and speculation. The government was facing a blank wall. No bodies, no survivors, no wreckage from the lifeboats, and no distress calls. There were only the chilling facts of an empty ship and the deafening silence of 12 missing men. The deeper investigators looked, the bigger the mystery got. It's a story that pulls you in, a puzzle with a dozen possible answers, but none that fit perfectly. If this mystery is pulling you in the way it pulled us in, we'd be hugely grateful if you could hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and click the notification bell. We have so many more mysteries to explore together. Now, with the ship gone and the investigation in full swing, the federal government had to consider every possibility. Where could the crew have gone? Let's get into the theories. The first and most enduring theory was mutiny. The evidence for an uprising was pretty compelling, and it all started long before the ship hit the graveyard of the Atlantic. The conflict began with that last-minute crew change. You had Captain Wormel, an old-school sea captain, and his first mate, Charles McClellan, a man with a clear problem with authority and alcohol. The public arguments in Barbados were Exhibit A. McClellan's drunken complaints and the alleged threat to get the captain established a clear motive. Captain Wormel himself was afraid of it. He'd put his worries in writing to his friend. This wasn't just speculation, it was documented tension. Then you have that bizarre scene at the Cape Lookout lightship. The man on the megaphone wasn't an officer. The crew was on the quarterdeck, where they shouldn't have been. This points to a total breakdown of the ship's hierarchy. It strongly suggests that by January 28th, Captain Wormel was no longer in command. The fact that the final log entries were in an unknown handwriting seems to confirm it. Someone else had taken control. The physical evidence on the wreck also fed the mutiny theory. The shattered steering wheel could easily be a sign of a violent struggle. In the end, Herbert Hoover and his lead investigator, Lawrence Ritchie, concluded that mutiny was the most likely answer. The story seemed to fit. A disgruntled crew, led by a belligerent first mate, rises up against their captain, seizes the ship, and then, what? This is where the mutiny theory starts to fall apart. If the crew pulled off a successful mutiny, why would they abandon a perfectly good, valuable ship? Usually mutineers take the ship, not desert it. And if they did abandon it, where did they go? They would have left in 2 small lifeboats in the middle of a vicious winter storm. It sounds like suicide. One captain at the scene believed the crew looted the ship and ran her aground on purpose. But that just leads to the same question. Where did they go next? Mutiny explains the conflict, but it doesn't explain what happened to the mutineers. If not mutiny, maybe the crew fell victim to something else. Pirates. In the early 1920s, piracy wasn't entirely gone. More importantly, it was the dawn of prohibition, and the East Coast was becoming a hotbed for rum running. The Deering, with its huge cargo hold, could have carried a fortune in illegal liquor. So, was the crew involved in a smuggling deal gone wrong, or were they attacked by criminals? This theory blew up on April 11, 1921, when a fisherman named Christopher Columbus Gray came forward with a message in a bottle. The note inside was a desperate plea. It read, Deering captured by oil-burning boat something like chaser. Taking off everything, handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over ship, no chance to make escape. Finder, please notify headquarters Deering. Suddenly, the mystery had a story. The bottle was proven to have been made in Brazil, where the Deering had just been. And, most convincingly, Captain Wormel's widow identified the handwriting as that of the ship's engineer, Henry Bates, the one man her husband had trusted. The message seemed to confirm the sighting of a mysterious steamer seen trailing the Deering. The idea of a pirate attack, maybe even by Bolsheviks as some papers wildly speculated, took hold. The FBI was now hunting for a phantom pirate ship. But just as quickly as the theory appeared, it collapsed. First, there were problems with the logic. Why would a crewman writing a desperate note ask the finder to notify company headquarters instead of the police? Then the whole thing unraveled. Investigators discovered that Christopher Columbus Gray had forged the note. He hoped the fame would help him get a job at the local lighthouse. Handwriting experts backtracked on their initial assessment, and eventually, the lead investigator tricked Gray into a confession. The message in a bottle was a complete hoax. And with that, the piracy theory lost its only piece of real evidence. While some still think rum runners could have been involved, there's just no proof. A slow, obvious sailing vessel like the Deering would have been a terrible choice for smuggling anyway. The theory was dead in the water. Maybe the explanation wasn't sinister at all. Maybe it was just tragic. The waters off Cape Hatteras are infamous for a reason. The graveyard of the Atlantic is where violent storms can appear with terrifying speed. We know for a fact that a series of powerful hurricanes had just swept through the area. This leads to the simplest theory. The crew abandoned ship in a catastrophic storm. One of the first Coast Guard captains on the scene, a veteran named R.L. Gaskell, dismissed all the talk of mutiny as so much newspaper bunk. He offered what he saw as a logical explanation. He argued that after the ship lost its anchors, it became uncontrollable in the storm and ran aground. Facing 90-mile-per-hour winds and waves like mountains, the crew had a terrible choice. Stay on a wrecked ship that could break apart any second or take their chances in the lifeboats. For Captain Gaskell, the missing lifeboats were all the proof he needed. In such a sea as this, he stated, the crew of the Deering manned their lifeboats and tried to make shore 9 miles away. It would have been a futile effort, practically suicide. No small boat could have survived those waters. The crew would have been swamped and lost almost immediately. This theory explains the missing crew and the missing lifeboats in one simple, tragic move, but it struggles with the other strange details. If you're panicking and abandoning a ship in a hurricane, why would you take the time to gather your personal belongings and the ship's log? And the biggest question of all, why would the ship be found with its sails fully set? Standard procedure in a storm like that is to furl the sails to keep the masts from snapping. Leaving them up makes no sense. The calm scene in the galley with a meal cooking also doesn't fit with a panicked evacuation. The storm was definitely a huge factor. But the simple abandonment theory doesn't quite line up with the evidence. When logic fails and evidence disappears, people often turn to the supernatural. And in the world of maritime mysteries, no force is bigger than the Bermuda Triangle. The legend as we know it wouldn't fully form for a few more decades, but the Carroll A. Deering would become one of its founding stories. The Triangle is a loosely defined area of the Atlantic where countless ships and planes are said to have vanished. The Deering's final voyage took it right through the western edges of this notorious patch of ocean. For many, the sheer weirdness of the crew's disappearance was enough to link it to the Triangle's reputation. The idea that some paranormal force just plucked the crew from the deck offered an explanation, however fantastic, for the complete lack of any trace. Newspapers, books, and TV shows have all enthusiastically pushed this theory, cementing the Deering's place in supernatural lore. It is, however, a theory on shaky ground. For one, the Deering was wrecked off North Carolina, hundreds of miles from the core area of the Bermuda Triangle, and official investigators have always dismissed any claims of the supernatural. Most incidents blamed on the Triangle have later been explained by severe weather, human error, or were just flat-out exaggerations. The Bermuda Triangle theory provides a convenient, otherworldly answer to an impossible question. It plays on our fascination with the unknown, but without a shred of evidence, it remains firmly in the realm of folklore, a tantalizing but ultimately empty footnote in the official investigation. And the theories didn't stop there. Investigators considered other possibilities, each with its own problems. Could the Deering have collided with another ship, like the SS Hewitt, which also vanished at the same time with its 42-man crew? This might explain the lost anchors. But if they collided, why did the man on the Deering only mention lost anchors and not a catastrophic collision? Plus, no wreckage from the Hewitt was ever found. There were even whispers of a Bolshevik plot to hijack American ships and sail them to Russia, a theory that was popular in the press but had zero proof. The official investigation, led by Ritchie and Hoover, eventually ground to a halt. After nearly 2 years, they had nothing definitive. In late 1922, the investigation was officially closed, with no formal explanation ever given for the disappearance of the crew. The case went cold. We're left with the same questions that haunted investigators a century ago. Why was the meal left on the stove? Who was the mysterious red-haired man on the deck? Why would a crew pack their bags but leave in such an apparent hurry? And the biggest question of all, where did 12 men in 2 small lifeboats go? The ocean is vast, but to disappear so completely, without a single body or piece of wreckage ever washing ashore, is almost statistically impossible. The sea, it seems, had swallowed them whole. The story of the Carroll A. Deering is a perfect mystery. It's a tapestry woven from human conflict, the terrifying power of nature, and the allure of the unknown. Each theory seems plausible, right up until it smacks into a contradictory piece of evidence. A mutiny explains the conflict, but not the abandonment. A storm explains the wreck, but not the weirdness on board. Piracy explains a violent takeover, but is based on a proven lie. The Bermuda Triangle explains everything and nothing at all. For more than 100 years, the fate of Captain William Wormel and his 11 crewmen has remained one of the sea's most profound secrets. The ship itself is long gone, dynamited into splinters with only a few relics, like its bell and possibly its capstan, surviving in a museum in Hatteras. They serve as a tangible link to a story that has otherwise passed into legend. The ocean holds the truth locked deep within the graveyard of the Atlantic. The Carroll A. Deering is more than just a ghost ship. It's a timeless reminder of how thin the line is between a routine voyage and an eternal mystery. The men are gone, the ship is gone, and all that remains is the story and the endless unanswered question. What happened to the crew? What do you think is the most likely explanation? Let us know your theory in the comments below.
Close your eyes. It is October 1917. The world is at war. In the waters of the English Channel, ships are being sunk every single day. German U-boats patrol beneath the surface, silent and invisible, hunting anything that moves. Merchant vessels, supply ships, fishing boats. It doesn't matter. If it floats, it can disappear. No one is surprised anymore when a ship doesn't arrive. No one asks too many questions. There is a war on. People vanish. Ships vanish. That's simply what happens in wartime. And so, when the schooner Zebrina fails to arrive at her destination, at first, no one panics. She was a small vessel, a 3-masted trading schooner built in 1873, old but reliable. She had made the same run dozens of times. Her job on this particular voyage was simple: carry a load of coal from Aberdour in Scotland down across the Channel to Saint-Brieuc on the northern coast of France. A short trip, routine, the kind of journey that doesn't make headlines under any circumstances. Her crew was small, 5 men, a captain and 4 sailors. Their names were recorded, their faces were not. In wartime, paperwork matters. People sometimes don't. The Zebrina departed on the 15th of October, 1917. She never arrived. At first, her absence was absorbed into the noise of the war. Ships were being lost constantly. The English Channel, in 1917, was one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the world. A small coal schooner failing to reach port could mean 100 different things, and most of them involved a torpedo. A search was not immediately launched. Resources were scarce. There were larger vessels to worry about. A 5-man schooner carrying coal was not a priority. But then, 2 days after she was supposed to arrive, something strange happened. The Zebrina reappeared. She was found off the coast of Rosal Point near Cherbourg, on the northern coast of France. She had run aground on the rocks. Her sails were still partially set. The hull was largely intact. There was no fire, no explosion damage, no flooding in the lower decks. The coal was still in the hold, undisturbed, and there was no one on board. No captain, no sailors, no bodies, no lifeboats deployed, no distress signals sent. The crew of 5 had simply ceased to exist. The investigators who boarded the Zebrina in those first hours noted something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Everything was in order. The ship's log was open on the chart table, with entries written up to a point, and then nothing. The last entry was dated October the 17th, 2 days after departure. The handwriting was calm, normal. There was no indication of distress, no final desperate message, no warning scrawled in the margins. Just ordinary log entries and then silence. The table in the crew's quarters was set, not ransacked, not overturned. Dishes were out. A meal had either just been prepared or was about to be. The smell of food, or what had once been food, still lingered in the air. The men's personal belongings were in their bunks. Clothes, small mementos, things that people take with them when they go somewhere. Things that people leave behind when they don't plan to leave at all. The navigation equipment was in place. The rigging, though weathered by the storm that had apparently passed through the channel in the days prior, was not catastrophically damaged. A trained crew could have sailed her, if there had been a trained crew. Let the sound of the water hold you now. The channel is cold this time of year. October water, the kind that takes your breath before you even realize it has you. The investigators stood on the deck of the Zebrina, and they looked at each other, and they had no answer. 5 men. Gone, no sign of struggle, no blood, no broken glass, no indication that anyone had fought or run or screamed. Just a ship, intact, drifting, and a silence so complete it felt like it was trying to say something. In 1917, the most obvious explanation was the war. A German U-boat had surfaced, they reasoned, and the crew had been taken prisoner. It happened. German submarines sometimes captured merchant sailors, brought them below, and left the vessel to drift. It was a cruel but not uncommon wartime tactic. But the German Navy's own records, examined decades later, after the war, when archives were opened and logs were cross-referenced, showed no U-boat activity in that area of the channel on those dates. The Germans, in their meticulous documentation, had recorded every surface encounter, every capture, every sinking. The Zebrina appeared in none of it. If a U-boat had taken those men, there was no record of it anywhere, which meant either the records were wrong or something else had happened on that ship, something no one had thought to document, because no one had survived to tell them what it was. Stay with the ship now. Let the darkness hold you. We are only just beginning. There are places in the world where the past refuses to stay quiet. The English Channel is one of them. It is one of the busiest, most documented stretches of water in human history. For centuries, navies have crossed it, merchants have crossed it, refugees have crossed it. Every shipwreck, every storm, every disappearance has been noted somewhere. In port records, in naval logs, in the testimony of survivors who made it to shore. And yet, in the middle of all that documentation, in the middle of a world war in which every vessel and every movement was being tracked, 5 men vanished from a ship in broad daylight and left absolutely no evidence behind. Not a body, not a lifeboat, not a single witness who saw anything unusual. The Zebrina simply returned without them, as if she had gone somewhere, done something, and come back alone. The formal investigation began quickly, as these things go in wartime. British naval authorities boarded the ship, cataloged what they found, and began interviewing anyone who might have information. The port workers who had loaded the coal in Aberdeen, the harbor master who had recorded her departure, any other vessels that had been in the channel during those same days. What they assembled was a picture full of gaps. The weather had been bad. A storm had moved through the channel on the night of October 16th. The night between the last log entry and the discovery of the ship. Winds had been significant. Visibility had been poor. Several other ships had reported difficult conditions during the same window of time. This was noted, filed, and ultimately it explained nothing. Because storms do not make 5 men disappear without a trace. Storms capsize ships, flood decks, snap masts, dash vessels against rocks. They leave wreckage, they leave bodies, they leave evidence of violence and chaos and the particular brutality of the sea at its worst. The Zebrina had none of that. She was battered by the weather, yes, but she was not destroyed, and her crew was not drowned, not crushed, not washed overboard. Or if they were, the sea had swallowed them so completely that not even a coat or a boot washed up on the French shoreline. Breathe slowly now. Think about what it means to be on a ship at night, in a storm, in the middle of a war. You cannot see anything beyond the hull. The water is black. The sky is black. The sound of the wind makes it nearly impossible to communicate across the deck. You hold on to whatever is nearest to you, and you wait, and you trust that the ship will hold, and you trust that the men around you are doing what they're supposed to do. You trust the ship. You trust each other. That trust is everything out there. Without it, there is only the water and the dark. The investigators could not determine a cause. This was unusual. In wartime investigations, ambiguity was rarely tolerated. There were procedures, forms, classifications. A ship was lost to enemy action, or to weather, or to mechanical failure. A crew was killed, or captured, or survived. These were the categories. These were the boxes that needed to be filled in. The Zebrina refused to fit into any of them. The inquiry eventually produced a verdict so vague it said almost nothing. The crew had disappeared under circumstances that could not be determined. The ship had been found seaworthy. No enemy action could be confirmed. The case was closed. Not because it had been solved, but because a world at war does not have time for mysteries that don't advance the front line. The Zebrina was repaired, refloated, and returned to service. She continued to operate after the war ended, quietly, under different owners, until she was finally decommissioned and sold for breaking in 1929. She was scrapped, reduced to materials, and the question of what happened to her crew in October of 1917 was folded into the enormous silence of everything else the war had consumed. But some questions don't stay buried. Over the years, as historians and researchers began to sift through the wreckage of the First World War, through the logs and the letters and the official records, the Zebrina kept reappearing, not because anyone had new evidence, but because the absence of evidence was itself so striking. In a war that killed millions, in a sea lane that swallowed hundreds of ships, the disappearance of 5 men from an intact vessel remained one of the strangest anomalies anyone could find. Not because it was the largest tragedy, but because it made so little sense. Every other mystery had, at minimum, a plausible explanation. A likely cause. Something you could point to and say, this is probably what happened, even if we can't prove it. The Zebrina had nothing. No U-boat, no storm damage severe enough to account for 5 missing men. No signal, no message, no witness, no body. There is a theory, one of many that have been offered over the decades, that the crew was somehow swept overboard during the storm. A rogue wave, perhaps. A sudden catastrophic surge that took all 5 men at once before any of them could react. It is the most rational explanation available. It is also deeply unsatisfying. Because if 5 men were swept off a deck in the middle of a channel storm, at least one of them should have been found. The currents, the shoreline, the patterns of the water. All of it suggests that something would have returned. A body, a piece of clothing, something. The sea is not usually this thorough. Let the silence fill the spaces between the words now. You are very close to sleep. The ship is still out there, somewhere in the deep, and the water keeps its secrets. There is something that investigators noticed and rarely spoke about openly. Something that didn't fit neatly into any official report, but that kept surfacing in the accounts of the men who had boarded the Zebrina in those first hours after she was found. The ship felt wrong. Not structurally, not mechanically. The hull was sound, the rigging was functional, the cargo was intact. On paper, the vessel was in acceptable condition for a ship that had just weathered a channel storm. But the men who walked her decks described a quality to the silence that they struggled to articulate. A stillness that felt less like the absence of noise and more like the presence of something they couldn't name. Sailors are not generally given to superstition. Or rather, they are, but they rarely admit it in official testimony. These men, however, came close. One inspector reportedly refused to go below deck a second time. He never explained why. Let's sit with the theories for a moment, not to resolve them, but to feel the shape of them. The way they each reach toward an answer and fall just short. The U-boat theory. It is the most commonly cited explanation, even now. A German submarine surfaces in the storm. The crew is ordered on deck at gunpoint. They are taken prisoner and transferred below. The U-boat submerges. The Zebrina drifts. It is clean. It is logical. It fits the historical context almost perfectly, except for the records. The German naval archives from the First World War are among the most meticulously maintained military documents in history. The Imperial German Navy recorded surface encounters with extraordinary precision. Ship names, coordinates, times, outcomes. Captures were documented, sinkings were documented, even near misses were documented. There is no entry for the Zebrina, not in October, not in that section of the channel, not under any name or description that could plausibly match her. Historians have checked multiple times. Different researchers, different archives, different years. The result is always the same. The U-boat that supposedly took those 5 men either didn't exist, or operated in a silence so complete that it left no trace in any record ever produced by either side of the war. The weather theory has already been examined and found wanting, but there is a variation of it that some researchers find more compelling. Not a rogue wave, not a sudden surge, but something more gradual and more terrible, a slow emergency. Picture this. The storm hits harder than expected. The Zebrina is taking on water somewhere, a small breach, not catastrophic but serious. The captain makes a decision to attempt a controlled evacuation. The lifeboat is prepared. The crew boards it in an orderly fashion, intending to ride out the worst of the storm at a short distance from the ship and return once conditions improve. But the lifeboat drifts. The storm pushes it faster than anyone anticipated. The Zebrina herself, unmanned, is pushed in a different direction by the wind. Within minutes, the gap between them is too large. Within an hour, they cannot see each other at all. 5 men in a small boat in October in the English Channel at night in a storm. They would not have lasted long, and a small lifeboat in those waters, in those conditions, might never be found at all. It is a plausible sequence of events. It accounts for the absence of bodies. It accounts for the absence of signal. They may not have had time or equipment to send one. It accounts for the orderly state of the ship. They left in a hurry, but not in panic. But it does not account for the meal on the table. If you are preparing to evacuate a vessel, even in a controlled, calm fashion, you do not set the table for dinner first. You do not arrange dishes and prepare food and then quietly file out into a lifeboat. You leave. You move. You focus on survival. The meal on that table suggests something else entirely. It suggests that whatever happened, happened fast, or happened without warning, or happened in a way that no one on that ship was expecting. They were, by every indication, simply going about their lives. And then they were gone. Breathe. You are safe. You are not on that ship. You are not in that water. You are here, warm, and the sounds around you are the sounds of a world that makes sense. Let that feeling settle into your body. There is one more theory. It is the one that gets discussed least often in academic contexts, precisely because it has no evidentiary basis and no logical framework that supports it. But it is the one that the sailors of that era would have recognized immediately. The sea took them. Not a wave, not a boat, not an enemy. The sea itself, in the way that the sea has always, in the imagination of the people who sail it, had a will of its own, a hunger, an indifference so vast and so complete that it operates according to rules no human being has ever fully understood. The Zebrina sailed into a part of the channel that the war had made extraordinarily dangerous. She sailed into a storm. She sailed through water that had already swallowed hundreds of ships and thousands of men in the preceding 3 years of conflict. And when she came out the other side, she was alone. Maybe that's all there is to say. Maybe the sea doesn't owe us an explanation. The 5 men who crewed the Zebrina on her final voyage have no graves. There are no markers, no memorials specifically dedicated to them. Their names exist in port records and in the pages of the inquiry, and in the small, stubborn community of researchers who have spent years trying to understand what happened in the English Channel in October of 1917. But the sea has no record of them. The sea, as always, kept what it took. You are very nearly asleep now. The ship moves in the dark. The water is deep. And somewhere, in the silence between waves, 5 men are still sailing. There is a particular quality to unsolved cases that have aged well past a century. They lose the urgency of the investigation, the desperation of the families, the noise of the press and the bureaucracy and the official inquiries that go nowhere. All of that falls away, slowly, over decades, until what remains is something quieter and stranger. Just the question itself, sitting in the dark, patient, unchanged. The Zebrina has been gone since 1929, scrapped, her materials recycled, her wood and metal absorbed into other things. There is no physical ship to visit, no hull to stand on, no deck to walk. She exists now only in documents and photographs and the occasional black and white image of a 3-masted schooner that may or may not be her, the caption always slightly uncertain. But the question she left behind has proven more durable than the ship itself. What do we do with a mystery that has no solution? This is not a rhetorical question. It is a genuine one that historians and investigators and ordinary curious people have had to reckon with, not just in the case of the Zebrina, but in all the cases like her. The Mary Celeste, the Joyita, the Baychimo, ships that returned without their people and offered nothing in the way of explanation. There is a human instinct, a deep one, almost reflexive, to find a pattern, to impose order, to say, here is what happened, here is the cause, here is the sequence of events that led from A to B to C. We are storytelling creatures. We need the arc. We need the ending. The sea has no interest in providing one. This is perhaps its most unsettling quality. Not its depth, not its storms, not the creatures that live beneath its surface, but its absolute indifference to the human need for narrative. The sea does not care if the story makes sense. The sea does not care if there are witnesses or records or grieving families waiting on shore. The sea just moves. And sometimes, when it moves, things go with it and don't come back. Let your breathing slow down now. In through the nose. Hold it for just a moment, and out. The weight of the day is leaving your body. You can feel it going. The tension in your shoulders, the pressure behind your eyes, the low hum of everything you were supposed to do and didn't. Let all of it go. You are horizontal. You are warm. The sounds around you are soft and constant. You are safe in a way that those 5 men, in October of 1917, may not have been. Remember that. Not with fear, but with something closer to gratitude. The ordinary miracle of being somewhere that holds you. The English Channel today is one of the most heavily monitored bodies of water in the world. Radar, satellite tracking, automatic identification systems on every vessel above a certain tonnage, Coast Guard patrols, naval presence, civilian monitoring networks. If a ship gets into trouble anywhere in the channel today, the response time is measured in minutes. In 1917, there was none of that. There was only the water and the wind and whatever the men on a ship could see from their deck with their own eyes. Radio was in its infancy. Navigation was by compass and chart and the kind of hard-won intuition that comes from years at sea. If something went wrong, you were largely on your own until the water brought you somewhere, or until someone stumbled across you. The Zebrina's crew was operating in that world, a world where the gap between help and helplessness was measured not in minutes, but in days. A world where the English Channel, for all its relative smallness, could swallow 5 men as easily and as silently as any ocean. We have built so many systems since then to prevent exactly this, to make sure the sea cannot take people without leaving some trace, some signal, some record. And still, there are cases. There are always cases. The sea is patient in a way that technology is not. The last entry in the Zebrina's log was written on October the 17th, 1917. We don't know who wrote it. We don't know if the man who held that pen had any sense in that moment that something was wrong. The entry itself gave no indication. It was routine. Coordinates, weather observations, the kind of notation that a sailor makes 100 times over the course of a voyage without ever thinking twice. He put the pen down, and after that, nothing. No more entries, no more handwriting, no more evidence that any living person was aboard that ship. Just the log, lying open on the table, waiting for a next entry that never came. There is something almost tender about that image, if you let yourself sit with it. A book left open, a story interrupted mid-sentence. The physical record of a life, of several lives, ending not with drama or punctuation, but simply with a blank page that goes on and on. That is, the Zebrina. Not a horror story, exactly. Not a ghost story in the traditional sense. Just a question mark, a gap in the record. A handful of men who went to work one October morning, who did what they had always done, who pointed their ship south across the channel, and who the world lost track of somewhere between the last entry and the next morning's light. The sea kept them. We never got them back. Sleep now. The water is deep and dark and very far below you. The ship is quiet. The log is open. And somewhere in the channel, in the place where the records go silent, the Zebrina is still sailing, carrying her question through the dark. No captain, no crew, no answer. Just the wind in the sails and the sound of the sea, moving. Always moving, taking you somewhere soft and still and very, very far from here. Good night.
A deep-sea diver's supernatural encounter. They tell you the pressure is the most dangerous thing down in the deep. They're wrong. They say equipment failure is the biggest threat. They're wrong about that too. The most dangerous thing is realizing you're not alone. It's finding something that shouldn't exist, something that sees you, and something that doesn't want you to leave. My name is Elias Vance. For 20 years, I was a professional deep-sea diver and submersible pilot. I've seen things on the abyssal plains that would make biologists weep. I've brushed against creatures that glow with their own galaxies and navigated canyons that have never seen the sun. I felt that profound, crushing loneliness of the deep, and I always found a strange comfort in it. It was my cathedral, a place of silent, magnificent solitude. You have to understand, I was a rational man, a man of science, of engineering, of pressures and tolerances. I believed in what I could measure, what I could see on sonar, what my cameras recorded. Ghosts and phantoms, those were stories for sailors on foggy nights, not for a guy sealed inside a 12-ton titanium sphere. The dive into the Hesperian Depression was supposed to be the peak of my career. This wasn't a separate trench, not like the Mariana. This was a newly charted feature, a sudden, impossibly steep drop within the Kuril-Kamchatka trench system, a pit that went deeper than any recorded sounding in that region. It was a void within a void, a total unknown. The mission was simple. Get down there, survey, collect samples, and plant a flag for the Institute. It turned into a descent into a nightmare I am still trying to claw my way out of. I went down into that trench a scientist. I came back, something else. My submersible was the Odyssey, not some repurposed tourist boat. She was a state-of-the-art exploration vehicle. An engineering marvel built for one thing, to go where nothing else could. My home for the next 12 hours was the pilot sphere, a perfect globe of 90-meter thick titanium alloy. It was a one-atmosphere environment. What that means is the air pressure inside my little bubble was the same as it is on the surface. I was breathing normal recycled air, not some exotic pressurized mix. That's a crucial detail. It means no risk of nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep, which can cause hallucinations. In the Odyssey, what you saw was real. There was no chemical excuse for delusion. Miles above me, our support vessel, the Pathfinder, floated on a calm Pacific. "How's it looking down there, Elias?" The voice on the comms was Dr. Eris Thorne, our lead oceanographer and my lifeline to the world. "Beginning descent," I announced, all business. "All systems green. Sphere integrity is nominal." "Copy that, Odyssey," Eris crackled back. "We've got you on acoustic tracking. You are go for the deep. Enjoy the ride, Elias. Send a postcard from the bottom." The first part of the descent is always a journey through worlds. The first few hundred meters, the sunlit zone, are just dazzling. Light pierces the blue, lighting up schools of flashing silver fish. It's alive. But that beauty doesn't last. By 1,000 meters, you're in the twilight zone. The blue has faded to a deep, bruised purple. The only light now is bioluminescence. Ghostly creatures drifting past the viewports like pulsing jellyfish with tentacles of spectral lace. Below 2,000 meters, it's absolute blackness, the midnight zone. There's no up or down, just the silent, steady pull of gravity. My entire world was the gentle hum of the Odyssey's systems and the cones of light from my LEDs, cutting through a constant blizzard of marine snow, that gentle rain of organic junk from the world above. It's a lonely place, the kind of place that makes you think. You feel the weight of all that water, the mind-bending scale of it all. The pressure isn't just physical, it's psychological. The pressure gauge was my constant companion, its numbers climbing and climbing. 4,000 meters, 6,000. The pressure outside was now a force that could twist steel girders like licorice. The hull of the Odyssey would groan and creak, tiny pings and pops that sounded like gunshots in the quiet. They call it acoustic settling, the sound of the sub's frame compressing under miles of ocean. You get used to it, but you never fully relax. It's a constant reminder of the violent, instant death waiting if the engineering gives out. "Passing 8,000 meters, I reported. Hull pressure at 12,000 psi. All systems still green. The trench floor is another 3,000 meters down. Copy, Elias. Eris's voice was a little fainter now. You're making good time. The new sonar is picking up some unusual topography. Looks like a series of spires. Jagged. Unnatural. Unnatural how? I asked. A pause. The formation is too regular. Almost geometric. Could be a unique volcanic event. We'll need visual confirmation. I tweaked my trajectory, my hands moving over the controls with practiced ease. The Odyssey was an extension of my body, its 10 thrusters allowing for a delicate ballet in the crushing dark. At 9,000 meters, I slowed the descent. I was entering the Hadal zone, the realm of the trenches. The water outside was just above freezing. The pressure was almost beyond comprehension, over 15,000 pounds per square inch. It's a number so big it just becomes abstract. The best way I can describe it is to imagine the entire weight of a freight train balanced on your thumbnail. Now imagine that on every single inch of the sub. That's where I was. Reducing speed. Final approach to the depression floor, I said into the mic. Cameras are showing nothing but particulates. No sign of those spires yet. Should be coming up on your port side, Eris said. Our scans show them rising about 100 meters from the trench wall. It's odd. There's a strange sonar shadow around them, almost a dead zone. That's when the first thing happened. A flicker. The cabin lights blinked once, twice, then held steady. The hum of the environmental controls faltered for a second, then kicked back in. On my console, a yellow warning icon flashed for a microsecond, a power fluctuation. Eris, did you see that? I asked, a hint of concern in my voice. I just had a power flicker. Negative, Elias. All our telemetry from you looks perfectly stable. No power dips on our end. Must be a loose connection in a display. I frowned. A loose connection? On the Odyssey? Not likely. Every wire, every single component was triple redundant and stress-tested to hell and back. Redundancy is the religion of deep-sea exploration. The idea of a loose connection was more unsettling than a major failure because it just doesn't happen. I ran a quick diagnostic. Everything green, no faults. Must have been my imagination, I lied, mostly to myself. But then I felt it. A cold spot. In the perfectly climate-controlled sphere, the air right in front of my face went frigid. It was like someone had opened a freezer door. I could see my own breath misting. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then vanished. I checked the environmental controls. Rock solid 22 degrees Celsius, no fluctuations. A chill, totally unrelated to the temperature, went down my spine. The isolation I'd always found so comforting suddenly felt different. It wasn't solitude anymore. It felt like I was being watched. Approaching target depth, I announced, my voice a little tighter. 11,000 meters. Sonar has the floor about 300 meters below. Still no visual on those spires. They should be there, Elias, Eris insisted. Our long-range sonar is painting a clear picture of them. But there's that acoustic anomaly again. It's like a curtain. Something is scattering our signal right in front of the formation. I nudged the Odyssey forward, the powerful LEDs cutting through the ink. The marine snow was thicker here, a swirling vortex. And then, at the absolute edge of my lights, I saw it. It was one of the spires. But spire wasn't the right word. It was a pillar of black rock, basalt maybe, but it was impossibly smooth, almost polished. It didn't look like a volcanic vent. It looked carved. It shot upwards into the darkness, way beyond my lights. I panned the camera and saw another, and then another. They were arranged in a perfect circle, like monoliths from some sunken cyclopean temple. Eris, I breathed. I have visual. You're not going to believe this. They aren't spires. They're pillars, perfectly smooth and arranged in a deliberate pattern. The comms went quiet for a moment. I could just picture them in the control room. Eris and the geology team huddled around their screens, totally baffled. Can you get us a sample? Eris finally asked, his voice strained. Preparing the manipulator arm, I replied, my fingers flying over the controls. The Odyssey had 2 robotic arms. I extended the port side arm, its multi-jointed limb unfolding like an insect's leg. As it reached for the nearest pillar, a high-pitched whine started coming from my console. A new warning icon flashed, this one a stark, angry red. Sonar anomaly. Catastrophic signal distortion. Eris, I'm getting a massive sonar feedback loop, I said, my heart starting to pound. The whole system is screaming. We're seeing it too, he replied, his calm finally cracking. It's a ghost signal, a wave of energy with no source. It's impossible. The arm was inches from the pillar. The whining intensified, and just as the metal claw was about to touch the rock, it happened. The figure appeared. It didn't just pop into view, it was more like the darkness coagulated. Between 2 of the pillars, the swirling marine snow and the oppressive black seemed to pull together and take a form. It was humanoid. Tall and bulky, like a statue carved from shadow. The silhouette was unmistakable, though. It had the shape of a man in an old, antiquated diving suit. Not a modern atmospheric suit, but something much, much older. The kind with a bulky helmet, heavy breastplate, and weighted boots. A ghost of diving history. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My rational brain was screaming. Hallucination, stress, anoxia. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, I was breathing perfectly good air in a 1-atmosphere sphere. This wasn't narcosis. This was real. The figure was just floating, not swimming. It just drifted in the impossible pressure, a silent sentinel. It seemed to absorb the light from my LEDs, making it look blacker than the water around it. A dim, sick green-white glow pulsed faintly from where its helmet's viewport would be. My hand hovered over the comms button. What was I supposed to say? Eris, there's a ghost down here. They'd pull me up so fast my career would be over before I hit the surface. I'd be a cautionary tale. So I just stared, my mind a storm of terror and disbelief. All the legends you hear, the phantom divers, the deep-sea hauntings, they all came rushing back. Just stories, weren't they? Then it moved. It didn't swim. It glided, effortlessly. It drifted forward, out from between the pillars, right into my lights. As it got closer, I felt that unnatural cold again, but this time it was a wave of icy dread that washed over the whole sub. The internal temperature gauge on my console visibly dropped. 22 degrees, 20, 18. A delicate frost pattern bloomed across the inner surface of the viewport in front of me. This was not in my head. The figure slowly raised an arm. It wasn't a threat. It was a gesture, a clear, unmistakable warning. It was telling me to go back. My blood ran cold. This wasn't some passive apparition. This was an intelligence, and it knew I was here. For a long moment, I was paralyzed. My mind, used to quantifiable threats, just couldn't process a phantom at the bottom of the sea. My training finally kicked in. The prime directive for any pilot is to survive, and every instinct I had screamed that this thing was a threat far greater than pressure or mechanical failure. I had trespassed. Eris, I whispered, aborting the mission. I repeat, aborting, preparing for immediate ascent. Elias? What's wrong? What did you see? Eris's voice was sharp with alarm. No time. Just get ready for a fast ascent, dropping ballast. The ascent procedure on the Odyssey is foolproof. The sub descends using massive steel blocks held by electromagnets. To go up, you just cut the power. The weights drop, and the sub's buoyant foam core rockets it to the surface. It's a dead man's switch. It has multiple redundant releases. It cannot fail. I reached for the primary release switch. As my fingers closed around it, the figure drifted closer. The green-white light from its helmet flared, flooding my cabin with a nauseating glow. I flicked the switch. A click. Then, nothing. The ballast released indicator stayed dark. A red error light flashed next to it. Magnetic coupler fault. No, I whispered. No, no, no. Elias, what's happening? Eris yelled over the comms. We've lost your primary telemetry. What's your status? Primary ballast release is non-responsive, I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. Switching to secondary, I slammed the cover off the emergency backup and flicked it. Again, nothing. That same mocking error light. This wasn't just a failure, this was a violation of engineering. The two release systems were on completely separate circuits. For both to fail at the same time wasn't just improbable, it was impossible. Outside, the figure had stopped. It just hung there in the water, a silent, malevolent statue, its glowing gaze locked on me. And I knew. With a certainty colder than the abyss, I knew when it was doing this. This wasn't a malfunction, it was an attack. Comms are breaking up, Eris, I yelled as a shriek of static ripped through the speakers. Something is interfering. Can you hear me? Lias, repeat. His voice dissolved into static and then silence. The comms were dead. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker. Everything. Cabin lights, consoles, external LEDs, gone in an instant. I was plunged into a blackness so complete it felt physical, a suffocating blanket. The only light was the horrifying green-white glow from the thing outside my viewport. The hum of life support died. The only sounds left were my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. I was trapped. 11,000 meters down. A coffin of titanium and ice in a dead submersible, with a ghost staring in the window. Panic took over. I fumbled in the dark for the manual ballast release, a purely mechanical lever that physically severs the connection. The last resort. My fingers found the cold steel. I pulled. It didn't budge. It felt welded in place. I put both hands on it, braced my feet against the bulkhead, and pulled with everything I had. The metal groaned, but it wouldn't move. The cold was becoming unbearable. The frost on the viewport was a thick layer of ice now, obscuring the phantom's shape, leaving only its chilling light. My breath came out in ragged white plumes. The emergency backup display, on its own tiny battery, read 5 degrees Celsius, and dropping. Despair washed over me. This was it. This is how I die. Not in a catastrophic implosion, but a slow, freezing death in the dark, haunted by an impossible creature. I'd be another ghost story for sailors. My oxygen would last for hours, but I'd freeze to death long before that. I slumped back in my seat, defeated, my eyes fixed on the pulsing green light. In that moment, I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated hatred wash over me from outside the hull. It was a consciousness, ancient and powerful and filled with loathing for me, for my little metal machine, for my intrusion into its silent world. Then, a new sound, a low, grinding shriek of protesting metal. I braced for the end, thinking the hull was finally giving way. But the implosion never came. Instead, the Odyssey lurched violently upward, throwing me against my restraints. The grinding noise was the sound of the ballast weights being torn from the hull. The emergency display flickered to life. Ascent rate, critical. I was shooting toward the surface like a cork. The ballast hadn't been released. It had been ripped off. The ascent was pure chaos. I wasn't a pilot anymore. I was a passenger on an uncontrolled missile. The Odyssey was spinning, tumbling as it screamed towards the surface. Alarms I didn't even know we had were blaring in the darkness. I was sure the viewport would be the first thing to go. I don't remember all of it. I think I blacked out. My last conscious thought was of that green light fading into the abyss below. It hadn't tried to kill me. It had let me go. Or maybe it just threw me out. I woke up to violent rocking and frantic shouting. Daylight so bright it hurt flooded the cabin. The hatch was open, hands were pulling at me. I could smell salt and diesel fumes. I was on the surface. I was alive. They told me the Odyssey had surfaced 3 miles from the Pathfinder's position. It was a miracle they found me at all. She was battered and scarred with 2 huge gashes where the ballast assemblies had been forcibly torn away. The official report was a masterpiece of saving face. Cascading power failure, it said, originating from a previously undetected flaw in a primary battery cell. This surge, they claimed, fried multiple systems, including comms and the ballast release. The violent ascent. Catastrophic failure of the electromagnet housing under extreme pressure, leading to an explosive release of the ballast weights. My experience? The figure? The cold? They explained that away too. A micro-leak in an oxygen valve, they hypothesized, had caused a stress-induced hallucinatory episode. It was nonsense. A 1-atmosphere system can't cause narcosis or hypoxia like that without setting off a dozen alarms, none of which went off. But it was a plausible story. It closed the book. It preserved the reputation of the Institute and their multi-million-dollar submersible program. They called me a hero. They said my calm handling of an unprecedented emergency saved my life in the vessel. They gave me a medal. I took it. And I resigned the next day. I never dived again. I can't. Sometimes at night when the house is quiet, I can still feel it. That profound, absolute cold. That feeling of being watched by something ancient and hateful from a place of eternal darkness. I don't know what I saw down there in the Hesperian Depression. A ghost? A guardian? Some unknown entity whose existence shatters our understanding of life? I went down there looking for science. I found a truth that science can't explain. They tell you the pressure is the most dangerous thing in the deep. They're wrong. The most dangerous thing is the knowledge that some places are meant to stay undiscovered, and that something is down there, waiting, to make sure they stay that way.
The year is 1969. A group of Inuit hunters are moving across the frozen surface of the Beaufort Sea, off the northern coast of Alaska. The Arctic in winter is a landscape without mercy. White in every direction, temperature below -30, wind that cuts through every layer of clothing as if it isn't there. Then one of them stops. In the distance, half buried in pack ice, is the silhouette of a ship. A large ship. Old. Its hull dark against the white horizon. They know this ship. Every person in the region knows this ship. Because this is the Baychimo. And the Baychimo was abandoned 38 years ago. They approach carefully. The vessel is intact. No visible damage. No signs of life. It sits in the ice the way it has been sitting in the ice, on and off, for nearly 4 decades. As if it is simply waiting. As if it has nowhere else to be. As if it has all the time in the world. This was the last confirmed sighting of the SS Baychimo. After 1969, the ship was never seen again. But here is what makes this story different from every other ghost ship you have ever heard. The Baychimo did not vanish in a single night. It did not disappear in a storm or sink without a trace. It spent 38 years drifting through some of the most inhospitable waters on the planet. Spotted dozens of times by hunters, explorers, and sailors. And each time it was found, it was still afloat. Still intact. Still, somehow, refusing to go under. This is the story of the ghost ship that would not die. To understand the Baychimo, you need to understand the world it was built for. In the early 20th century, the Arctic was not the remote and forgotten place it seems today. It was a frontier. Brutal and unforgiving, yes, but alive with commerce, with trade routes, with communities that had existed for thousands of years and a growing network of ships that connected them to the outside world. The Hudson's Bay Company had been operating in the Canadian and Alaskan Arctic since the 17th century. By the 1920s, their fleet of trading vessels made annual voyages along the northern coastline, carrying goods to remote Inuit settlements and returning with furs, skins, and other Arctic commodities. These were not pleasure cruises. They were difficult, dangerous, and essential. The SS Baychimo was built in 1914 in Hamburg, Germany. It was a steam cargo ship. Solid, reliable, designed for exactly the kind of work the Hudson's Bay Company needed. 322 feet long. A veteran of the North Sea during the First World War. By the time it entered service on the Arctic trade routes in 1921, it had already survived more than most ships see in a lifetime. For a decade, the Baychimo made its annual runs without incident. Summer voyages north, trading with Inuit communities along the Alaskan coastline, returning south before the ice closed in. It was a hard life for the crew. Months at sea in waters that could freeze solid without warning. But the Baychimo was good at its job. In October of 1931, it left on what was supposed to be its final run of the season. It would never complete that voyage. The Arctic has its own calendar. Its own rules. And in the fall of 1931, the ice came earlier than anyone had anticipated. The Baychimo was working its way along the Alaskan coast, loaded with a cargo of furs, when the temperature dropped suddenly and dramatically. Within days, the sea around the ship began to freeze. The captain, a veteran named Sidney Cornwell, ordered full steam ahead, trying to push through before the ice closed completely. It was too late. By mid-October, the Baychimo was locked in pack ice near the town of Barrow, Alaska. The hull was gripped on all sides. The engines were useless. The ship was going nowhere. Captain Cornwell made a decision. The crew, 36 men, would wait it out. They set up a temporary camp on the ice nearby, expecting the freeze to loosen, expecting the ship to free itself as it had done before. This was not an unusual situation for Arctic vessels. Ice trapped ships. Ice released them. You waited. But the ice did not release the Baychimo. Weeks passed. The temperature continued to fall. The Arctic winter settled in completely, and it became clear that the ship was not going anywhere until spring at the earliest. The Hudson's Bay Company sent aircraft to evacuate most of the crew, leaving only a small team of 15 men behind to watch over the vessel through the winter. Those 15 men set up a more permanent camp on the shore, close enough to monitor the ship. They settled in for a long, dark Arctic winter, checking on the Baychimo regularly, keeping records, waiting for the spring thaw. Then, in November, the blizzard came. It lasted for days. A full Arctic storm. Zero visibility, wind so strong that moving outside the camp was impossible. The men huddled inside their shelter and waited for it to pass. When the storm finally broke and the skies cleared, one of the crew members walked to the edge of the shore and looked out at where the Baychimo had been sitting in the ice. The ship was gone. Not damaged. Not sinking. Gone. The ice where it had sat was empty. The Baychimo had simply vanished during the storm. Broken free, perhaps, or been driven under. No one knew. The men searched as best they could in the aftermath of the blizzard, but found nothing. Captain Cornwell reported the ship as lost. The Hudson's Bay Company began processing the insurance claim. Everyone assumed the Baychimo had finally succumbed. Broken apart by the ice, dragged under, gone to the bottom of the Beaufort Sea. They were wrong. Less than 2 weeks after the ship disappeared, a local Inuit hunter named Unga spotted something on the horizon. A ship. Large, dark-hulled, drifting slowly through open water some 45 miles from where the Baychimo had last been seen. It was the Baychimo. Intact. Floating. Completely unoccupied. Word reached Captain Cornwell, who organized a small party to reach the vessel. When they boarded it, they found the ship in surprisingly good condition. The cargo of furs was still in the hold. The structure was sound. The Baychimo had not been destroyed by the storm. It had been freed by it, pushed into open water, and had been drifting ever since. The captain faced a decision. The ship was intact, but the Arctic winter was now fully established. Attempting to sail it south through pack ice, with a skeleton crew, in worsening conditions, the risk was too great. They removed as much of the valuable cargo as they could carry and made a second decision to leave the Baychimo behind. The logic was simple. The ship was old. It was already compromised by the ice. It would not survive the winter drifting unprotected in Arctic waters. By spring, it would be at the bottom of the sea, and that would be that. They left. The Baychimo did not sink. In March of 1933, a fur trapper named Leslie Melvin was traveling through the area when he came across an unmistakable sight. The Baychimo, drifting in the ice, still afloat, still intact, more than a year after it had been abandoned for the second time. Melvin boarded the vessel. He spent 10 days aboard it, sheltering from the cold, exploring its empty corridors and holds. The ship was in remarkable condition. Weathered, yes. Worn by the ice and the cold. But structurally sound. Still floating. Still stubbornly refusing to go down. He left when the weather permitted, and the Baychimo drifted on. In 1934, it was spotted again. This time by a group of explorers near the Alaska coast. They attempted to board it but were prevented by the surrounding ice. They watched it from a distance and moved on. In 1935, a sighting near Point Barrow. In 1936, another report, further west. Each time, the ship was described the same way. Drifting. Intact. Empty. By now, the Baychimo had acquired a reputation. Sailors and hunters along the Arctic coast knew the story. The ship that the Hudson's Bay Company had written off, still somehow out there, still surviving winters that should have destroyed it a dozen times over. It had become something more than a ship. It had become a fixture of the Arctic. A landmark. A ghost. Then, in the winter of 1939, something happened that moved the story into genuinely disturbing territory. A group of Inuit, traveling across the ice near the Beaufort Sea, encountered the Baychimo and decided to board it for shelter. They had done this before. The ship's abandoned holds provided reasonable protection from the elements. But this time, while they were aboard, a storm moved in. Not a passing storm. A sustained, violent Arctic storm that made it impossible to leave the vessel for days. The group was trapped on the Baychimo. A ship with no crew, no engine power, no fixed position, drifting through pack ice in the middle of an Arctic winter. They remained aboard for 10 days. 10 days on a ghost ship, moving through ice-filled waters, with no idea where the vessel was taking them or when the storm would break. All of them survived. When the weather cleared, they were able to make their way back to land. But the experience left a mark on everyone who heard about it. The Baychimo wasn't just drifting. It was, in some impossible sense, protecting people. Sheltering them. As if it still had a purpose. As if it wasn't finished yet. The sightings continued through the 1940s and into the 1950s. The Baychimo appeared and disappeared along the Arctic coastline with no predictable pattern. Sometimes close to shore, sometimes far out in the Beaufort Sea, sometimes locked in ice for months before breaking free again. Each time it was found, it was the same. Empty. Intact. Drifting. By 1962, the ship had been floating for 31 years since its abandonment. In maritime terms, this is not just unusual. It is essentially impossible. A vessel adrift in Arctic waters, without maintenance, without anyone to pump out its bilges or repair its seams, should have deteriorated and sunk within a few years. The Baychimo should have been at the bottom of the ocean before 1935. But in 1962, a group of people spotted it near the Alaskan coast. Still there. Still afloat. The final confirmed sighting came in 1969. The Inuit hunters who encountered it near the Beaufort Sea pack ice were not alarmed by what they found. The Baychimo was almost a familiar presence by then, a feature of the Arctic landscape that had been part of the region's story for nearly 4 decades. They observed it, noted its position, and moved on. After that, silence. The Baychimo was not seen again. In 2006, the state of Alaska launched an official effort to locate the Baychimo. Using historical sighting records, oceanographic data, and modern search technology, investigators attempted to determine where the ship might have ended up. They found nothing. No wreck. No debris field. No evidence that the Baychimo ever sank at all. The ship did not appear to have been destroyed. It simply stopped being seen. There are a few possible explanations. The Baychimo may have finally succumbed sometime after 1969, sinking in a location and under conditions that left no recoverable trace. The Arctic is vast, and its floor holds many secrets. But there is another possibility. The Beaufort Sea is enormous. The pack ice that covers it shifts and changes constantly, opening channels in summer and sealing them in winter. A vessel drifting in those waters, unoccupied and without a transponder, could go years or decades without being spotted even if it was still floating. The Baychimo was found 38 times over 38 years. But it was not searched for continuously. It appeared when conditions allowed it to be seen, and disappeared when they didn't. The last confirmed sighting was 1969. That is 57 years ago. But in the Arctic, 57 years is not as long as it sounds. The question that the 2006 search could not answer, and that no one has been able to answer since, is this: is the Baychimo still out there? I want you to sit with that for a moment. A ship built in 1914. Abandoned in 1931. Drifting, unoccupied, through some of the world's most violent and inhospitable waters for nearly 4 decades. Surviving storms, ice, decades of Arctic winters that would have destroyed any vessel by any reasonable measure. And then, gone. Not sunk. Not found. Just gone. There is something about the Baychimo that resists easy explanation. Not because the facts themselves are supernatural. A ship caught in favorable currents, buoyed by its cargo, protected by its own construction. But because of what those facts add up to when you hold them together. The ship that was abandoned twice. The ship that was written off as lost and then found again. The ship that sheltered a group of stranded travelers for 10 days and then released them safely. The ship that was seen 38 times over 38 years and then simply ceased to be seen. Every ghost ship story ends with a wreck. With a discovery. With an explanation, however incomplete. The Baychimo has no ending. It is the only ghost ship in recorded maritime history that was never confirmed sunk, never found wrecked, and never recovered. It existed in a kind of maritime limbo for nearly 4 decades. Present enough to be seen and boarded and sheltered in, absent enough to drift for months without contact, persistent enough to survive conditions that should have destroyed it 100 times over. And somewhere in the Beaufort Sea, if the currents have been kind and the ice has held it gently, it may still be there. Drifting. Empty. Intact. Waiting to be found one more time. The Hudson's Bay Company never recovered the Baychimo. The cargo of furs, worth a significant sum in 1931, was either salvaged during Captain Cornwell's visit or lost to the sea in the years that followed. The ship's registry was eventually struck. It was officially declared lost. But officially lost and actually gone are 2 different things. And in the Arctic, where the ice preserves what the rest of the world forgets, the line between those 2 things has always been blurry. Captain Cornwell spent the rest of his career with the Hudson's Bay Company. He never returned to search for the Baychimo. He had made his decision in the winter of 1931, and the Arctic had made its own decision in return. The men who were stranded on it in 1939 never spoke publicly about the experience in detail. 10 days on a drifting ghost ship in an Arctic storm is not the kind of thing that translates easily into words. And the Inuit hunters who saw it for the last time in 1969 went home, told their families what they had seen, and returned to their lives. The Baychimo drifted on. And then it stopped being seen. I have read a lot of maritime mysteries. The Mary Celeste. The Carroll A. Deering. The Aurang Medan. Ships that disappeared, ships whose crews vanished, ships that were found in impossible conditions. Most of them have one thing in common. They are, ultimately, stories of endings. Of things that were lost. Of questions that were never answered because what was lost is gone beyond recovery. The Baychimo is different. Because the Baychimo is not a story about something that was lost. It is a story about something that refused to be. For 38 years, that ship was out there. Real. Physical. Boardable. People stood on its deck. They slept in its holds. They used it for shelter in the worst storms the Arctic had to offer. And then it stopped being seen. Not sunk. Not found. Not explained. Just, out there. Somewhere. In the ice and the dark and the silence of the Beaufort Sea. Waiting. I want to know what you think happened to the Baychimo. Did it finally sink sometime after 1969, quietly, without witnesses, taking its secret to the ocean floor? Is it still drifting somewhere in the Arctic, too remote and too icebound to be spotted? Or is there something else, some quality of that ship, some combination of construction and current and cold Arctic water, that has kept it floating for over a century? Leave your theory in the comments. I read every single one. If this story is keeping you awake tonight, good. That means it worked. Subscribe, so the next one finds you. I am the Night Chronicle. And the Arctic is still keeping its secrets. Sleep well.
There is a particular kind of silence that belongs only to the open ocean. It is not the silence of an empty room, or a quiet street, or a forest at night. It is something heavier than those silences, something older. The ocean has a way of absorbing sound, of pulling voices and footsteps, and the ordinary noise of human life, down into itself, until there is nothing left but the low hum of wind and water. Until there is nothing left to prove that anyone was ever there at all. On the morning of January 8, 2003, an Australian patrol aircraft was flying a routine route over the Timor Sea, roughly 80 nautical miles east of a remote reef system called the Rolly Shoals. The waters there are clear and extraordinarily deep. They are also extraordinarily empty. Almost nothing passes through that part of the ocean. There are no major shipping lanes nearby, no major fishing grounds. No reason, under normal circumstances, for a vessel to be drifting alone in those waters without a destination. And yet, there it was. The crew of the patrol aircraft saw it from altitude first. A small vessel, maybe 20 meters long, sitting almost perfectly still on the surface of the water. No movement on deck, no signal flags, no response to radio contact. Just a boat, floating in a part of the ocean where boats had no particular reason to be. They reported what they saw, and a boarding party was dispatched. What they found when they climbed aboard would take weeks to begin to understand, and, in certain important ways, would never be understood at all. The vessel was called the High Aim 6. It was a Taiwanese longliner, a commercial fishing boat built for extended deep-sea operations, capable of spending months at a time far from port. It had left the small island of Liuqiu in the south of Taiwan on October 31st, 2002. On board were 12 men, a Taiwanese captain named Chen Tai Cheng, a Taiwanese engineer named Lin Chung Lee, and 10 Indonesian crewmen whose names and faces had been logged into the ship's registry before departure. By any reasonable standard, the High Aim 6 was a working vessel in the middle of a working voyage. It had fuel, it had provisions, it had a functional engine, which was, in fact, still running when the boarding party climbed over the rail and set foot on the deck. The tanks were not empty. The hold was not flooded. The weather in the area had been calm. There had been no distress call. No emergency beacon had been activated. No debris field had been spotted. No sign of fire or collision or any of the ordinary catastrophes that take ships in the night. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Except for one thing. There was no one on board. The crew's personal belongings were still in their bunks, clothing, small valuables, the private and ordinary things that people carry with them when they go to sea for months at a time. All of it was still there, exactly where it had been left. The hold was full of fish, rotting fish by now, because the catch had been sitting unrefrigerated for what investigators would later determine to be somewhere between 5 and 10 weeks. Long enough for the smell alone to announce the ship's abandonment before anyone had even opened the hatch. The engine was running. The food was there. The belongings were there. The men were not. Australian authorities contacted the ship's owner, a Taiwanese woman named Tsai Huang Shui Er. She told investigators that she had last spoken with Captain Chen in December of 2002, several weeks before the ship was discovered. The conversation had been routine. There had been nothing unusual in his voice, nothing that suggested anything was wrong. And then, silence. She had heard nothing since. No distress. No explanation. No goodbye. Investigators began the slow, painstaking work of trying to reconstruct what had happened aboard the High Aim 6 in the weeks between that last phone call and the moment the patrol aircraft spotted the drifting vessel from the air. What they would eventually piece together was darker than most of them had expected, and in the end, it would raise more questions than it answered. The investigation into the disappearance of the High Aim 6 moved slowly, as investigations at sea often do. The ocean does not preserve evidence the way that land does. There are no footprints, no tire tracks, no neighbors who heard something in the night. There is only water and wind and whatever the ship itself managed to hold on to while it drifted, alone, for weeks across the Timor Sea. And what the High Aim 6 had held on to, the belongings, the provisions, the quietly rotting catch in the hold, told investigators very little about what had actually happened to the people who should have been aboard. The ship was registered in Taiwan and flew under an Indonesian flag, a common arrangement in the international fishing industry. The crew had been hired through brokers in Indonesia, men brought aboard for a voyage that was supposed to last several months and return them home with wages for their families. That was the arrangement. That was what everyone had agreed to back in October, before the High Aim 6 had slipped away from the dock at Liu Chiu and disappeared into the Pacific. Investigators from both Taiwan and Australia began trying to trace the crew. Of the 12 men who had left port that October, only one could be located. He was an Indonesian national, one of the crewmen who had been hired for the voyage. Authorities found him through his mobile phone records, a trail of signals that placed him back on Indonesian soil sometime in late December or early January. Weeks before the ship itself was discovered, he had made it home. The others had not, or at least could not be found. He was brought in for questioning. What he told investigators was simple and brutal, and left almost as many questions as it answered. He said there had been a mutiny. At some point during the voyage, he was vague about exactly when, and investigators would later note that his account shifted in certain details over multiple interviews. Tensions on board the High Aim 6 had reached a breaking point. He did not explain fully what had caused those tensions. The fishing industry is a hard world. Long voyages in close quarters, far from home, in difficult conditions, can do things to people that are not always easy to explain later. Whatever the cause, what happened next was not in dispute, at least not in its broad outline. The captain, Chen Tai Cheng, was killed. The engineer, Lin Chung Li, was also killed. The surviving crewmen, however many of them remained, then abandoned the vessel and made their way back to shore by means that were never fully documented. Small boats, perhaps, other vessels encountered at sea. The specifics of how 10 men crossed hundreds of miles of open ocean after committing murder on a commercial fishing boat were never clearly established. What was established was that they did somehow manage it, and that by the time the High Aim 6 was found drifting with its engine running and its hold full of rotting fish, the men who had been aboard it were scattered, or hidden, or dead themselves, in ways that no investigation ever completely untangled. Only one man spoke, and he said only enough to confirm that something terrible had happened, and to leave almost everything else to the imagination. The bodies of Captain Chen and engineer Lin were never recovered. No one else was ever charged. No one else was ever found. There is a word that investigators use in cases like this one, when the evidence runs out before the answers do. The word is inexplicable. It does not mean that nothing happened. It does not mean that there is no explanation. It means simply that the explanation that exists, the partial, incomplete, fragmentary account that survived, is not enough. Not enough to explain everything. Not enough to close every open door. Not enough to satisfy the part of the human mind that needs, fundamentally, to know how a story ends. The case of the High Aim 6 was declared, in its official summary, to be a case of murder, followed by the flight of the remaining crew. That much, at least, was supported by the available evidence. 2 men had died. 1 man had confessed in broad terms to knowing what had happened to them. The ship had been left behind, deliberately abandoned, the engine running, the personal belongings still in the bunks, because the men who left had either been in too much of a hurry or too frightened or simply too exhausted by whatever had happened in those final days to gather what was theirs before they went. But the official summary left many things unsaid. It did not explain what had caused the mutiny. Investigators speculated, underpayment perhaps, or poor conditions, or some specific grievance that had built slowly over the weeks at sea until it finally broke through the surface. The fishing industry in that part of the world has a long and difficult history of labor disputes, of migrant workers brought aboard under agreements that were not always honored, of men who found themselves far from home with fewer protections than they had been promised. None of that excuses what happened on the High Aim 6. But it may help to explain how 12 men who had each agreed individually to make a voyage together could find themselves weeks later in a situation that ended in violence. It did not explain how the surviving crewmen reached shore. The High Aim 6 was found 80 nautical miles from the nearest reef system, and much farther than that from any populated coastline. For men to have left that vessel and reached land alive, they would have needed another vessel, a chance encounter, a pre-arranged pickup, something. The ocean in that area is not a busy place. The odds of stumbling upon another ship by accident are not favorable. And yet, apparently, they did. Because they were gone, and some of them at least had reached Indonesia alive. It did not explain the silence. That is perhaps the strangest part of all of this. Not the murder, as terrible as that was, but the weeks of silence that followed it. The High Aim 6 had drifted alone through the Timor Sea for somewhere between 5 and 10 weeks before anyone noticed it. 5 to 10 weeks of calm water, clear skies, a boat with a working engine going nowhere in particular, while somewhere on the other side of the ocean, a woman was trying to reach her captain by phone and getting no answer, while somewhere else families were waiting for crewmen who would not be coming home, or who had already come home and said nothing, or who were still out there somewhere in the ordinary world, living ordinary lives, carrying the weight of what had happened on the water. No official investigation ever fully closed the case. The Indonesian crewman who spoke was never charged with a crime. The others were never identified, or located, or brought in for questioning. The captain and the engineer were never buried, because there was nothing left of them to bury. The High Aim 6 itself was eventually scrapped, the last physical remnant of what had happened out there on the Timor Sea, dismantled and repurposed, as old ships always are, until nothing remained to mark the fact that it had ever existed. Only the questions remained. There are certain stories that stay with you not because of their violence, or their mystery, or even their strangeness, but because of the particular shape of the silence they leave behind. The High Aim 6 is one of those stories. It is not, on its surface, a supernatural story. There are no ghost lights on the water, no apparitions on the deck, no sounds that cannot be explained. It is, at its core, a story about people, about what can happen when people are pushed too far, or feel that they have been wronged, or find themselves in a situation that has gone beyond what any of them had planned for. It is the kind of story that happens in the real world, in the quiet, unwitnessed spaces of the ocean, where no one is watching and there is no one to call for help. And yet, there is something about the image of that ship, drifting alone for weeks, the engine still running, the food still there, the fish quietly decomposing in the hold. That belongs to a different kind of story, something older and stranger than a labor dispute and a mutiny, something that touches on the same darkness as all the great ghost ships of history. The Mary Celeste, found abandoned in the Atlantic with the captain's log still open on the table. The Carroll A. Deering, run aground off Cape Hatteras with food on the stove and the crew gone. The Joyita drifting in the South Pacific for weeks before anyone found it. Ships that simply ceased one day to have people on them, and that continued in their absence to float and drift and wait the way ships do, as if they had not yet received the news that they had been abandoned. The High Aim 6 waited for 5 to 10 weeks, long enough for the fish to rot, long enough for the engine to burn through most of its fuel, long enough for a patrol aircraft to spot it from altitude and send a boarding party to climb over the rail and find nothing but the silence and the smell. The man who confessed is still alive, somewhere. If the investigators who spoke with him were correct about his account, and there is no guarantee that they were, because his account shifted, and people who have been involved in violence at sea are not always reliable narrators of their own experience, then he knows what happened. He knows how the mutiny began. He knows what was said and what was done, and how it ended. He knows how the survivors got off the boat, and where they went, and what lives they have been living in the years since. He has never, as far as the public record shows, said anything more than he said in those initial interviews, and no one has been able to compel him to say more. Somewhere in the Timor Sea, in waters that are clear and deep and very far from anywhere, whatever remains of the captain and the engineer of the High Aim 6 is still drifting. The ocean does not give back what it takes. It holds things. It keeps them in that heavy ancient silence that belongs only to deep water. That silence that absorbs sound and voices and the ordinary noise of human life until nothing is left. Until there is nothing left to prove that anyone was ever there at all. The engine ran until it didn't. The fish rotted until they were found. The ship drifted until it was stopped. The men were never found. The sea kept them. It always does. Imagine the most isolated place on Earth, a tiny barren strip of coral and white sand, floating alone in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean. No trees, no fresh water, no human settlement for thousands of miles in any direction. Just the blinding equatorial sun and the deafening, endless roar of the waves crashing against the reef. Now, imagine walking along that empty shoreline, a place where no human being is supposed to be, where no human being has lived for centuries, and finding a shallow grave, not an accident, not a natural formation, a grave made of carefully, deliberately stacked coral stones. Someone had gathered them one by one. Someone had arranged them with intention, with care, and protruding from the top of those stones, a human jawbone. But that is not the most terrifying part of this story. Tucked inside the grave, wedged between the rocks, fluttering slowly in the dead ocean wind, was a small stack of gold and silver foil papers, joss paper, an ancient Chinese tradition. Paper burned at funerals to ensure the safe passage of the dead into the afterlife. A ritual performed with reverence and precision for someone who mattered. A ritual performed perfectly on a cursed, uninhabited island in the middle of nowhere, where no one should have been. To understand how this nightmare came to be, and whose bones were buried beneath those stones, we have to travel back 10 years, and thousands of miles away. February 11th, 1979, the small town of Hana, on the eastern shore of the island of Maui, Hawaii. It was a Sunday morning, The kind of morning that makes you forget that the ocean can be anything other than beautiful. The water was glass, flat and silver and still. The sky was a perfect unbroken blue that stretched to the horizon in every direction. 5 friends decided it was the perfect day to take a boat out. Their names were Scott Mormon, Peter Hanchett, Benjamin Kalama, Ralph Maliakini, and Patrick Wausner. They were not strangers to the ocean. These were local men who had grown up near the water, who respected it, who knew its moods. Scott Mormon, 26 years old, was known as careful and calm. Ben Kalama had fished these waters his entire life. They were not reckless men. Their boat was called the Sarah Joe, a 17-foot Boston whaler. Open hull, no cabin, no shelter. A solid, reliable boat built for calm coastal waters and short trips. The kind of boat you take out on a beautiful Sunday morning and bring back by late afternoon. They loaded a cooler with food and beer. They said goodbye to their families on the dock. They waved, someone took a photo, and they motored out into the deep blue channel, planning to be back before dark. The ocean was still smiling. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it stopped. The change came without warning. There was no gradual buildup, no slow darkening of clouds on the horizon. One moment, the sky was blue. The next, the atmosphere simply collapsed. The barometer plummeted. Meteorologists would later describe what happened as a freak storm system of almost impossible intensity. The worst to strike the Hawaiian Islands in over 50 years. A perfect catastrophe. A wall of weather that had built silently out at sea and then accelerated toward the coast with terrifying speed. The wind hit first, shrieking gale-force winds that turned the flat water into chaos within minutes. The sky darkened from blue to gray to a bruised, violent purple, and then to absolute black. The glassy ocean erupted into a nightmare of foam and towering waves. What had been flat water 2 hours ago was now walls of black water, 30 feet high, 40 feet high, rising and crashing in all directions. On the shore, the families of the 5 men stood in the freezing, blinding rain, staring out into the darkness, screaming names that the wind swallowed whole. Somewhere out there, beyond the reef, beyond the curtain of rain and foam, 5 men were trapped in a 17-foot open boat. Think about what that means. No cabin, no shelter, no radio, no emergency beacon. Just 5 men clinging to the sides of a small fiberglass hull as the Pacific Ocean rose up around them in the dark. The sky is black. The rain is hitting your face like shards of glass. You cannot hear your friends over the roar of the wind. You cannot see the shore. You cannot see anything. And every few seconds, a wall of black water lifts your entire world and throws it sideways before the next one comes. There is no preparing for that. There is no training that readies you for the sound of the ocean when it has decided to take you. When the storm finally broke the following morning, the silence it left behind was almost worse. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in the history of the Hawaiian Coast Guard. For 7 consecutive days, Coast Guard vessels, Navy aircraft, private planes, and volunteer boats combed thousands of square miles of open ocean. They flew low and slow, eyes scanning the surface. They searched every nearby island, every exposed reef, every piece of floating debris. They found nothing. Not a life jacket, not the cooler, not a seat cushion, not a single splinter of fiberglass from the hull of the Sarah Joe. 5 men in their boat had simply ceased to exist. The ocean had taken them completely, leaving the surface as smooth and indifferent as if they had never been there at all. The search was called off after a week. The families were left with nothing. No bodies to bury, no wreckage to grieve over, just absence. The particular, devastating kind of loss that comes without proof, where hope and grief exist at the same time for years, quietly destroying everything around them. Memorial services were held, names were spoken, flowers were placed on the water, and then life moved forward, because life always does, regardless of what the ocean keeps. The 5 men of the Sarah Joe became another entry in the long, quiet record of those claimed by the Pacific. Their story faded. The world moved on. 1 year passed, then 2, then 5, then 9. Mormon's family kept his room the same. Hanchett's children grew older and learned to answer questions about their father in short, practiced sentences. 9 years of silence. It is now September 1988. We are 2,800 miles from Hawaii, deep in the Marshall Islands in the remote western Pacific. A marine biologist named John Naughton was leading a small research expedition. Their destination was the Taongi Atoll, a place most people have never heard of, and most people would never choose to visit. Taongi is a dead place, one of the driest, most inhospitable atolls in the world. Completely uninhabited, surrounded by a jagged ring of coral reef that has torn open the hulls of ships for centuries. Even the indigenous peoples of the Marshall Islands avoid it. There is an old belief that Taongi is cursed, a place where spirits gather and the living do not belong. Naughton and his team spent an hour carefully navigating their small, inflatable raft through the violent surf that broke over the outer reef. They stepped onto the blinding white sand and began walking. What they were looking for was data, bird populations, coral health, the kind of quiet scientific inventory that no one publishes in newspapers. What they found was something else entirely. About halfway along the beach, Naughton stopped. There was something in the sand, partially buried, bleached bone white by years of brutal sun. A large, curved piece of fiberglass. He walked closer, crouched down, began brushing the sand away with his hands. It was the hull of a small boat. His hands were moving faster now, looking for a registration number, and there, faded and peeling but still legible, stenciled along the side in the way all registered vessels carry their identity. HA5927HI. Naughton sat back on his heels and stared at those numbers. Here is where the story becomes something that is almost impossible to accept as real. 10 years earlier, before Naughton had become a marine biologist based in the Marshall Islands, he had lived in Hawaii, and when the Sarah Jo disappeared in February of 1979, he had volunteered in the search. He had spent days in the air and on the water, looking for 5 men who were never found. He knew those numbers. He had looked at them on a missing vessel report a decade ago. After 9 years, after drifting across nearly 3,000 miles of open, violent Pacific Ocean, the Sarah Jo had come to rest on the only atoll in the western Pacific that a person who had searched for her would one day visit. The probability of that coincidence is almost too small to calculate. And yet, Naughton stood up, looked around the empty beach. The wind was the only sound. The reef broke and hissed in the distance. If the boat was here, then what about the men? The team spread out across the atoll, moving carefully through the low scrub and coral rubble, calling out, searching, 60 yards from where the Sarah Jo lay in the sand. They found the grave. The coral stones had been arranged with deliberate care. The depression beneath them had been dug by hand in the hard, resistant ground. This was not the work of someone in a hurry. Someone had taken time, had performed an act of burial with intention and respect. Protruding from the top of the stones was a human jawbone. The research team stood in silence. The wind moved over the coral. The sun was very bright. Nobody spoke for a long time. The bones were carefully recovered and sent to authorities in Hawaii. Dental records confirmed what John Naughton had already, somewhere in the back of his mind, begun to suspect. The remains belonged to Scott Mormon, 26 years old, when he left the dock at Haina on a beautiful Sunday morning, found 9 years later, 3,000 miles away, buried beneath a cairn of coral stones on the most cursed, isolated atoll in the Pacific. But the bones told investigators almost nothing about what had actually happened. Only that Mormon had died. Only that someone had buried him. Only that they had done so with extraordinary care. Because there was something else inside the grave. Tucked beneath the jawbone, placed there with absolute precision, was the stack of joss paper. Small squares of gold and silver foil, traditional Chinese funeral offerings, burned at burials to ensure the spirit's passage into the afterlife. A ritual with deep roots, performed not casually, but with full understanding of what it means. None of the 5 men aboard the Sarah Jo were Chinese. None had any known connection to Chinese burial traditions. There was no reason, no logical reason, for those papers to exist on that island, in that grave, beneath those particular bones. And yet, there they were. Investigators returned to Taongi. They dug in the sand. They searched every inch of the atoll. They looked for a second grave, a fire pit, tools, any trace of a camp. They found nothing else. Just the boat, the grave, the paper, and the wind. 4 men were still gone entirely. Peter Hanchett, Benjamin Kalama, Ralph Maliachini, Patrick Wausner. No trace of them has ever been found. Not then, not since. So, what happened? There are theories. There have always been theories, but none of them are satisfying. None of them close the door completely. One theory holds that the Sarah Joe, badly damaged by the storm, but not destroyed, drifted westward on the currents with some or all of the men still alive. That they survived for days or weeks on whatever provisions they had, rationing beer and food, watching the horizon for rescue that never came. That one by one, exposure and dehydration took them overboard, until only Mormon remained, and that when the boat finally grounded on Taongi's reef, he was already gone. But this theory cannot explain the grave. It cannot explain the Joss paper. It cannot explain who placed those offerings there, or why. A second theory suggests that a vessel found the drifting Sarah Joe somewhere in the open Pacific. Perhaps a fishing boat, perhaps a freighter, perhaps a vessel whose crew had reasons not to announce their presence. They might have found the boat with Mormon's body on board, dead from exposure. They carried him to Taongi, the nearest land, and buried him with the rituals they knew. Then they left, and told no one. This would explain the Joss paper, a Chinese crew performing the only funeral rite they understood. But it raises a question with no answer. Why bring a body to the most cursed, inaccessible atoll in the Marshall Islands? Why not a port? Why not an inhabited island where the death could be reported, unless they couldn't be seen? The third theory is darker. It suggests Mormon survived the entire drift, 3,000 miles, alone on an open boat, weeks at sea, slowly losing his grip on time and identity under the equatorial sun, that he arrived at Taongi barely alive, crawled ashore, and died on the beach, and that someone else was already there, someone who found him, someone who, for reasons we will never understand, buried him with ceremony and care, and then vanished without leaving a single trace of their own presence. In any direction you look, the story ends the same way, with a door that won't open, with a question the Pacific refuses to answer. The Sarah Joe has been called one of the most baffling maritime disappearances in recorded history, studied by researchers, investigated by authorities, written about by those who specialize in the unexplained. No one has ever produced an explanation that accounts for all the evidence. The Joss paper sits in a file somewhere. The coral atoll sits in the middle of the ocean. The wind moves over it the same way it always has. Scott Mormon was buried. Someone took the time to do it properly. Someone cared enough to ensure his passage. Who they were is a secret the Pacific intends to keep. As you lie there tonight, let the sounds around you slow. The world outside is quiet. You are safe where you are, but somewhere, in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth, a tiny island sits beneath a sky full of stars. The waves break over the reef in the dark. The coral stones are still there, arranged just as they were, and the wind moves over them, carrying nothing. Some things are meant to be lost, and some things will never be found. I am the Night Chronicle. Sleep well.
Off the coast of Queensland, Australia, April 20th, 2007. A helicopter crew on routine patrol spots something strange in the water below. A catamaran, 32 feet long, sails up, engine running, drifting slowly through the coral sea. They circle. No movement on deck. No one at the wheel. They call it in. When rescue teams board the vessel, what they find stops them cold. The engine is running. A laptop sits open on the table. A meal has been prepared. 3 life jackets are neatly stowed, right where they should be. 3 men had left port 5 days earlier. Not one of them was on that boat, and not one of them was ever found. This is the story of the Kaz 2. And unlike anything you have heard before, It happened in the modern world, in broad daylight, with cameras on board. We still do not know what happened. To understand how 3 men could simply vanish from a moving vessel in the middle of the day, we need to go back to where it all began. Airlie Beach, April 15, 2007. Airlie Beach is a small coastal town in Queensland, a launching point for sailors heading out to the Whitsunday Islands, one of the most beautiful stretches of water on the planet. Tourists come here to sail, to dive, to escape. Derek Batten was 56 years old. The Kaz 2 was his boat, his pride. He had sailed these waters before and knew them well. With him were brothers Peter and James Tunstead. Peter was 69, James, 33. 2 retired men joining their friend for what was supposed to be a leisurely sailing trip up the coast. Simple, familiar, safe. They departed on April 15th, heading northeast. The plan was to make their way up the Queensland coast, a trip many sailors do without incident. What we know of those first hours comes from a camera found on board. The footage shows all 3 men on deck relaxed, smiling. The ocean is choppy but manageable. They are in good spirits. This footage would later become one of the most haunting things investigators would review, because it captures the men alive and healthy, sometime during that voyage. Then the camera stops, and after that, we have nothing. No distress call was ever received, no debris was found in the water, no bodies were ever recovered. 5 days after they left port, the boat was found drifting, engine running, sails set, the GPS still functioning. The Kaz 2 had been sailing on its own for an unknown amount of time. The rescue team's report reads like something out of a ghost story. When they boarded, the first thing that struck them was the engine. It was running. Whoever had started it had never turned it off. The sails were up, set correctly for sailing. The boat was not in distress. It was not capsized. It was not taking on water. From the outside, you could look at the Kaz 2 and think the crew had just stepped below deck for a moment. But below deck told a different story. The table had food on it, a meal partially prepared. 3 sets of personal belongings were accounted for. The men's clothing, their phones, their wallets. 3 life jackets remained in their stowage, untouched. 1 life jacket was later found in the water nearby, floating alone. Whether it came from the Kaz 2 or drifted there from somewhere else could never be confirmed. The radio. Here is where things get complicated. Investigators discovered that the vessel's VHF radio, the primary communication device, was not functioning correctly. Whether it had failed before or during the voyage is unknown, but it means that if something had gone wrong out there, the men may have been unable to call for help even if they tried. And then there was the fishing line, tangled around the rudder. A single line caught and wound around the steering mechanism, the kind of thing that would bring a vessel to a crawl and require someone to go back and manually clear it. This detail would later become the center of the official explanation, but it would also become the source of the most disturbing questions. If you are finding this as unsettling as I am, make sure you are subscribed. New mysteries every week. Right here on the Night Chronicle, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau conducted a formal investigation. After reviewing the evidence, they released their conclusion, and officially, the case is closed. But officially closed does not mean answered. The first theory, the official explanation, is straightforward, if deeply tragic. Investigators believe that at some point during the voyage, the fishing line became tangled around the rudder, in rough seas, and the weather that day was no gentle breeze, with winds recorded at 20 to 25 knots and swells of 2 to 3 meters. The line would have wrapped tightly, making the boat difficult or impossible to steer. 1 man, likely Derek, went to the back of the vessel to clear it. On a wet pitching deck in those sea conditions, he fell overboard. The other 2 saw it happen. They rushed to help and without stopping to grab life jackets, and in the chaos, both of them went in as well. Within minutes, all 3 were in the water. The boat, engine still running, sails still set, simply continued sailing. Without anyone at the helm, it drifted northeast. For 5 days, it is a plausible explanation. Experienced sailors have drowned in exactly this way. Overconfident, moving too fast, forgetting the one rule that could have saved them. But here is what the official report does not explain. Why did none of the three men grab a life jacket? They were right there. Three experienced sailors aboard a well-equipped vessel with life jackets within arm's reach. The report suggests it happened too fast. That panic overrode reason, perhaps, but three men? Not one of them paused for even a second. And the camera that recorded them alive. At what point in the journey was that footage taken? If it was taken near the time of their disappearance, why does no one appear alarmed? Why are they smiling? The footage has never been fully released to the public. The second theory suggests that the explanation is not as simple as three men going overboard at the same moment. What if one of them became seriously ill or was injured before anyone entered the water? In rough seas, a fall below deck can be catastrophic. A head injury, a broken limb, a sudden cardiac event. Any of these could have incapacitated a man instantly. If Derek suffered a medical emergency, Peter and James may have gone into crisis mode, and in the confusion made a fatal error. This theory would explain the food on the table, a meal abandoned suddenly. The engine still running. No one calm enough to think to turn it off. The haste with which they may have moved, forgetting the life jackets entirely. But it still leaves the same question unanswered. Why did all three end up in the water? There is a third possibility, one that investigators have not publicly entertained, but that exists in the silence between the facts. What if someone else was out there? The waters around the Whitsundays are remote. Beautiful, yes. But the outer edges of that coastline are not patrolled. Ships pass. Vessels come and go. Piracy, modern, brutal, nothing like the romanticized version, is not common in Australian waters. But it is not impossible. In isolated stretches of ocean, a well-equipped boat can attract attention for the wrong reasons. Three men, aboard a 32-foot catamaran, electronics, GPS, gear, fuel. To the right kind of opportunist, that vessel represents value. If a second boat had pulled alongside, if an altercation had occurred, the chaos that followed could explain everything. The rushed departure, the bodies never found, the fact that the camera which recorded them alive somehow survived intact while the men did not. There is no evidence of foul play. No blood was found on board, no sign of a struggle, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and the ocean has a way of cleaning up after itself. Derek Batten, Peter Tunstead. James Tunstead, three names. Three men with families, with histories, with people who still grieve them. Their bodies were never recovered. In those waters, with those currents, that is not surprising. The Coral Sea does not give back what it takes. What stays with me, what I cannot stop thinking about, is the laptop, open, running, sitting, on the table of a boat that had been sailing unmanned. For 5 days, what was on that screen? The camera footage of them smiling alive, shot at some point during a voyage that ended in their disappearance. The fishing line, wound around the rudder, the life jackets, still in their place. Every piece of evidence points to a boat that was simply left. Not sunk, not destroyed, not even damaged in any significant way. Just abandoned, as if the men had been lifted off the deck and taken somewhere the sea could not follow. The ATSB closed the case. Accidental deaths by drowning. 3 experienced sailors undone by a moment of bad weather and worse luck. Maybe that is exactly what happened. But the detail I keep returning to is not the missing men, or the running engine, or even the life jackets. It is the food on the table someone had been cooking. Someone was mid-sentence in whatever the day was, and then in a moment all of that stopped. Not gradually. Not with a distress call or a signal flare or even a turned-off engine, just stopped. I want to know what you think, not what the official report says. What you think happened on the Kaz 2. Was it the fishing line about a tragic accident in rough seas? Was it a medical emergency that spiraled into disaster? Or is there something else out there? Something the investigation chose not to pursue? Leave your theory in the comments. I read every single one. If this story kept you up tonight, that means it worked. Subscribe so the next one finds you. I am the Night Chronicle, and the ocean still has its secrets. Sleep well.
There is a very specific kind of fear that comes when you wake up in the middle of the ocean, in the dead of night, when the only sound is the deep mechanical hum of the engines below you, and the endless heavy crashing of black water against the hull. In the dark, you realize just how small you are. You are entirely at the mercy of the sea. In July of 1909, a man named Claude Sawyer woke up in his first-class cabin on the SS Waratah, terrified. He was a man of logic, an experienced engineer. He was not prone to panic, and he did not believe in ghost stories. But the nightmare that woke him was so vivid, so violently real, that it shook him to his core. In the dream, he saw a man rising from the dark, freezing waves. The figure was wearing a medieval suit of armor, and he was wrapped tightly in a blood-soaked cloth. In one hand, the entity held a long sword, and with the other, he pointed directly at the ship, screaming its name into the freezing wind, Waratah. Sawyer sat in the pitch black of his cabin, listening to the creaking of the wood and the distant sound of the ocean, feeling an overwhelming, suffocating sense of doom. He knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that this ship was going to die, and he knew that if he stayed on board, he was going to die with it. The SS Waratah was not an old, rusting cargo vessel. She was the crown jewel of the Blue Anchor Line. Built in 1908, she was barely a year old. They called her the Titanic of the South, 3 years before the actual Titanic ever set sail. She was 500 feet of cutting-edge engineering, 8 watertight compartments, luxuriously appointed cabins, grand dining saloons, and elegant music rooms. She was carrying 211 souls on this voyage from Australia to London, with a brief stop in South Africa. For the wealthy passengers aboard, the ocean was just a backdrop to their evening parties. They drank champagne, they listened to live music, they slept in soft beds, entirely unaware of the abyss beneath them. But Claude Sawyer could not sleep. After his terrifying nightmare, he began to notice things. Small things at first. The way the Waratah moved in the water. It didn't slice through the waves. It rolled, a deep, heavy, sluggish roll, as if the ship was top-heavy, as if it was struggling, just a little too long, to right itself after every swell. Sawyer was an experienced engineer. He knew what a stable ship felt like, and this felt wrong. He spent his nights pacing the deck, watching the black water rise too close to the rails. The suffocating dread from his dream had bled into his waking hours. When the ship finally docked in Durban, South Africa, for a brief stopover, Sawyer made his decision. He packed his bags and walked down the gangway. He tried to warn the others. He spoke to a group of passengers, including the wealthy Hayes sisters, begging them to leave the ship. He told them about the sluggish rolling. He told them about his dream, the man in armor, the blood, the absolute certainty of death. They laughed at him. They told him he was being hysterical. They were on the finest ship in the southern hemisphere. The Waratah was unsinkable, they said. Sawyer stood on the docks in Durban and watched as the grand ship pulled away, heading back out into the violent waters of the open ocean. He had abandoned part of his luggage. He had lost the money he paid for his ticket. His friends thought he was crazy. But as he watched the Waratah disappear into the gray horizon, he knew he had just bought his life. On July 25th, the Waratah sailed into the notorious waters off the wild coast of South Africa. Sailors have another name for this stretch of water. They call it the graveyard of ships. The weather was turning. The wind picked up, howling across the open deck, and the sky bruised into a deep, sickly purple, before fading into a pitch-black night. That morning, another vessel, a cargo ship named the Clan McIntyre, spotted the Waratah. They exchanged standard signals. To the casual observer, the Waratah looked fine, cutting through the rising swells with its massive black hull. But the captain of the McIntyre noticed something unsettling. The Waratah was moving fast, too fast for the worsening conditions. And that heavy, sluggish roll, the exact movement Claude Sawyer had warned everyone about, was much worse now. Every time the massive luxury liner tipped into a wave, it seemed to hesitate. It hung at an impossible angle, just a fraction of a second too long, before groaning back upright. By nightfall, the storm hit with absolute vengeance. Hurricane-force winds whipped the sea into a frenzy. Waves reached 30, sometimes 40 feet high, slamming against steel like concrete. The ocean had become a dark, violent nightmare. Later that evening, a cavalryman stationed on the rugged South African coast was looking out over the black water. Through the blinding rain, he saw the distant lights of a large ship. It was struggling, fighting a losing battle against the massive swells. Then, he saw two blinding flashes of light, like sudden explosions in the dark. He watched closely, waiting for the lights to re-emerge from the waves. He waited and waited, but there was nothing. The lights never came back up. The ship was simply gone, swallowed by the abyss in a matter of seconds. No distress call was ever sent. No rockets were fired. 211 people, the wealthy, the crew, the children, simply vanished into the freezing black water. When the storm finally broke, the search began. The disappearance of the Waratah shocked the world. Ships scoured the South African coast for weeks. They expected to find debris, smashed lifeboats, deck chairs, bodies washing ashore, but they found nothing. Not a single piece of wood, not a life jacket, not a drop of oil, a 500-foot luxury liner, and 211 souls had been completely erased from existence. To this day, despite decades of sonar searches and deep-sea expeditions, the wreck of the SS Waratah has never been found. It remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in maritime history. Oceanographers believe the ship fell victim to a freak wave, a rogue wall of water, perhaps 60 feet high, that struck the sluggish, top-heavy vessel perfectly on its side. In this scenario, the ship wouldn't have sunk slowly. It would have rolled completely upside down in a matter of seconds, trapping everyone inside the luxurious cabins, the dining halls, and the music rooms, dragging them straight to the bottom of the abyss before they even knew what was happening. No time to scream, no time to deploy a lifeboat, just the violent, crushing weight of the black ocean. But Claude Sawyer knew. He lived the rest of his life with the chilling knowledge that the ocean had sent him a warning. A man in armor, a sword dripping with blood, a name screamed into the freezing wind. He listened to his fear, and he survived. It makes you wonder, if the dark waters whisper to us in our sleep, how many of us are actually listening? Tell me what you think happened to the Waratah in the comments. Do you think the wreck will ever be found? I read every single one. If the sound of the dark ocean is pulling you under tonight, good. Let it take you. Subscribe. So, the next story finds you in the dark. I am the Night Chronicle. Sleep well.